She entered the hospital in labor, but what happened next, no one could have foreseen. An experienced doctor, a quick nurse, and a delivery room ready for a routine birth. Until something bizarre and inexplicable changed everything. What they discovered left the team in a state of shock, forcing them to question everything they knew about life. It was an ordinary morning at the hospital. The muffled sound of footsteps and conversations echoed through the white hallways when suddenly, the automatic door burst open with a bang. Mara, a 35-year-old woman, stumbled in, her hands clutching her enormous belly. Her face was pale as wax, sweat dripping in thick beads down her forehead. Her eyes rolled in spasms of pure agony, and with every shaky step she took, a trail of amniotic fluid trickled down her legs, forming small puddles on the shiny floor. "I need help. My baby's coming," she screamed, her voice hoarse, laden with pain and desperation. Reverberating through the crowded lobby like thunder, Dr. Leandro, an experienced doctor who had just arrived to start his shift, still had his backpack slung over his shoulder and hadn't even changed into his uniform. He stopped dead in his tracks at the sound of her cry, his eyes widening at the chaotic scene unfolding before him. The woman looked on the verge of collapse, her body trembling as if it might crumble at any moment. His instincts kicked in louder than his shock. "Get a stretcher now," he ordered, turning urgently to the sides, his voice sharp as a blade. Nurse Katia, a quick and determined professional, dashed down the hall, pushing a wheeled stretcher that squeaked loudly against the floor. Dr. Leandro approached Mara, his heart racing as Katia maneuvered the stretcher closer. "We have to move fast, or she'll give birth right here in the middle of the lobby," he warned, his tone thick with tension. Without hesitation, they carefully lifted Mara, but she let out a loud groan, her hands gripping her belly so tightly that her fingers seemed embedded in the stretched skin. Her moans were a mix of physical pain and terror, as if something inside her was fighting to break free. As soon as they laid her on the stretcher, they began pushing it toward the delivery room, their footsteps echoing in a frantic rhythm. But suddenly, the stretcher came to a halt. A sharp jolt made Dr. Leandro frown, confused. "What's going on?" he muttered, lowering his gaze to investigate. Katia bent down at the same time, and what they saw left them speechless. A dog, large, sturdy, with glossy dark fur, was there, its teeth firmly clamped onto the metal frame of the stretcher, growling with a ferocity that sent chills down their spines. Its eyes gleamed with an almost human determination, as if it was dead set on not letting anyone take Mara away. "Hey buddy, you've got to move! We need to get through," Dr. Leandro exclaimed, trying to push the animal aside with his hands. But the dog didn't budge, its muscles taut, the growl growing louder, echoing through the halls like distant thunder. Katia, keeping her composure, stepped forward firmly, attempting to nudge it away with her shoulder. "Come on, get out of there," she said. But the animal stood its ground, a living statue of stubbornness and strength. The atmosphere in the hospital shifted in an instant. Staff stopped what they were doing, patients peeked through half-open doors, and a tense silence settled over the place, broken only by the dog's growls and Mara's faint moans. "Where did this dog come from?" whispered a janitor, gripping his broom tightly, his eyes wide with curiosity and fear. "Who let this animal in here?" asked a security guard, appearing in the hallway with a look of disbelief. Dr. Leandro and Katia exchanged glances, their faces etched with a mix of confusion and urgency. No one had answers, but time was running out. Then something even stranger happened. Mara, lying on the stretcher, her face twisted into a mask of suffering, tilted her head back and let out a sound that didn't seem human. It wasn't a moan or a typical scream. It was a howl, long and deep, cutting through the air like a razor. Seconds later, the dog responded abruptly, releasing the stretcher and perking up its ears. It barked once, then again, the sounds bouncing through the hospital's wide corridors, making even the calmest patients shrink back in their beds. "This can't be happening," Mara murmured, her voice faint, nearly lost amid the contractions racking her body. She turned her face toward the dog, her eyes glassy with pain and exhaustion, and whispered, "We'll be okay. Don't worry." The animal stared at her for a moment, its eyes shining with an unsettling intelligence, as if it understood every word. Then it took 2 steps back but didn't leave. It stayed there, motionless, watching everything with the stance of a silent guardian. Dr. Leandro shook his head, trying to shake off the unease that this surreal scene stirred in him. "Now let's go. We don't have time to waste," he commanded, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He and Katia pushed the stretcher with renewed force, their feet pounding the floor in a rapid rhythm as they raced toward the delivery room. The doctor's heart thumped wildly, his mind spinning with questions he had no time to answer. Who was this dog? Why was it here? But none of that mattered now. The focus was on the imminent birth. As soon as they reached the delivery room, the team sprang into action. Dr. Leandro slipped on surgical gloves with swift movements, the snap of latex ringing in the air. He approached Mara, who was breathing heavily, her eyes half closed from exhaustion. "How many months along are you, Mara?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. She took a deep breath, her chest heaving in spasms, and answered between contractions, 9 months. I think it's twins, doctor." He furrowed his brow, a deep crease marking his sweaty forehead. "Did you have an ultrasound?" Mara shook her head slowly, tears streaming down her temples. "No, I wanted it to be a surprise." The response hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Dr. Leandro and Katia shared a look filled with concern. Something didn't feel right. A twin pregnancy with no prenatal monitoring. It was far too risky. But before they could ask more, Mara let out a guttural groan and fainted for a few seconds, her hands clutching the stretcher sheets so hard her knuckles turned white. "They're coming. I can feel it," she shouted as she came to, her body arching in a spasm of pain. Wasting no time, the team positioned her for delivery. Katia held one of Mara's hands, trying to lend her strength, while Dr. Leandro got into place for the procedure. But as soon as they started, he noticed something odd. The amniotic sac had ruptured. The contractions were coming in intense waves, and Mara's body shook as if it might split in two, yet there wasn't enough dilation. "Mara, you've got to be strong. Push with everything you've got," Katia urged, squeezing her hand firmly. Mara closed her eyes, her face flushed with effort, and pushed with all her might. Once, twice, 3 times, but nothing happened. Time seemed to crawl, each second stretching into eternity. Her belly, massive and disproportionate, looked ready to burst, the skin stretched to its limit, but the babies wouldn't come. Suddenly, a sound from outside the hospital broke the tense silence in the room. A howl, long, deep, almost supernatural, echoed through the halls, seeping through the walls like a living presence. At that exact moment, Mara opened her eyes, pupils dilated, and threw her head back. She began to bark, a rhythmic, unrelenting sound that filled the delivery room with a strange, primal energy. Outside, the dog answered with loud, insistent barks. It was as if they were communicating, a silent conversation, heavy with meaning, that no one else could grasp. Dr. Leandro and Katia froze, the instruments trembling in their hands. Mara howled again, the sound bouncing off the hospital's cold walls, rattling the window panes. Outside, the dog howled back, its voice so loud it carried through the corridors, reaching even the upper floors. Nurses paused at their stations. Patients exchanged confused glances, and even the guard in the lobby felt a shiver crawl up his spine. "What's happening here?" whispered a nurse, clutching a trembling glass of water. Then, a heart-wrenching scream tore from Mara's throat, a sound so raw it seemed to carry all the world's pain. Dr. Leandro looked down, eyes wide, and shouted, "It's happening! Let's go!" Katia, still dazed by the surreal sequence of events, was slow to react. "Katia, I need you here now," the doctor yelled, his voice cutting like a whip. She blinked several times, trying to shake off the shock, and rushed to his side. The first baby was born, its piercing cry filling the room like a melody of relief. For a brief moment, everything seemed to return to normal. Dr. Leandro carefully took the baby, his hands steady, despite the sweat trickling down his forehead. But when he looked at the newborn's face, his expression changed drastically. His eyes widened in pure horror, his mouth opening in a silent scream before the sound finally broke free. A yell of astonishment that echoed through the entire hospital. Without thinking, he handed the baby to Katia and stumbled back, his body swaying until he collapsed unconscious on the floor. The sound of his fall was muffled by the echo of his own scream, a noise so loud that even the dog's howl outside seemed to falter for a moment. Katia, now holding the baby in her arms, felt her heart pound like an out-of-control drum. She took a deep breath before daring to look at the infant's face. When she did, her entire body began to tremble, her legs buckling as she whispered, "No, this can't be." Her voice was barely audible, laden with a fear she couldn't name. Before she could process what she saw, Mara, still lying on the stretcher, started barking again. The sounds coming in loud, desperate bursts. Amid the barks, another cry signaled the arrival of the second baby. Katya felt an icy chill run down her spine. "My God," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the newborn, trying to make sense of what was happening in that delivery room, to understand what was so terrifying about that baby. We need to go back in time, exactly 2 years before that chaotic day at the hospital. Mara and Joel had been married for just over a decade. At first, their relationship was like a fairy tale, an intense love filled with affection, companionship, and promises whispered in each other's ears. They laughed together, dreamed together, and built plans for a life that seemed perfect. But as the years passed, reality crashed down on them like an unbearable weight. Daily life brought routine, awkward silences, and a distance that grew slowly, like a crack in glass that no one knew how to fix. The love was still there, buried somewhere, but it was no longer enough to fill the void settling between them. In a desperate bid to reignite the spark and strengthen what remained of their marriage, they decided it was time to start a family. Having a child became the shared dream they believed could save them. They spent nights imagining what it would be like, picking out names, planning the baby's room. But fate had other plans. Despite endless attempts, costly treatments, and visits to specialists, Mara couldn't get pregnant. Each negative test fueled their frustration, a tight knot that choked them both. Until, after a battery of tests, the news that would change everything arrived. Joel was sterile. His infertility wasn't a random twist of fate, but the result of years of reckless choices. Joel was a bodybuilder obsessed with achieving physical perfection. For a long time, he'd used anabolic steroids in excessive doses, ignoring warnings, risks, and consequences. The sculpted body he flaunted with pride had come at a steep cost, his chance at fatherhood. When the doctor delivered the diagnosis, Joel felt the ground give way beneath him. Mara, beside him, listened to the words in silence, her face impassive. But inside, something shattered. She didn't say anything then, but she began to harbor a quiet resentment, a hurt that grew like weeds in the depths of her soul. Joel, meanwhile, sank into guilt. He looked in the mirror and saw not a strong man, but a failure. He tried to reach out to Mara, but the words wouldn't come, and the silences between them turned into chasms. Some days, they barely exchanged glances, sleeping in the same bed like strangers, divided by an invisible wall. When arguments erupted, they were explosive, full of accusations and swallowed tears. The tension was so thick, it suffocated the air in the house. It was in that void that Mara made a decision that would alter the course of their story. A friend, noticing the sadness consuming Mara, told her about a dog that had recently given birth. "The puppies are adorable. You should see them," she said, almost offhandedly. Curious, Mara went to check it out with no big expectations. Among the litter, one pup caught her eye. A black Labrador, sturdy, with bright eyes that seemed to peer straight into her soul. He wagged his tail eagerly when he saw her, an emotion so full of life it warmed something inside her. When she picked him up for the first time, she felt genuine joy, something she hadn't experienced in months, maybe years. "Your name's going to be Bro," she decided, smiling at the puppy as if he were the answer to all her prayers. But bringing Bro home wasn't so simple. When Joel got back from work and saw the dog running around the yard, his face hardened into a mask of irritation. "What the hell is this, Mara?" he asked, crossing his arms tightly, muscles bulging under his fitted shirt. She tried to keep her tone light, petting the puppy's head. "It's Bro. I adopted him today," Joel scoffed, his eyes flashing with anger. "Are you kidding me? A dog? Here? Do you know what that means? Hair all over the house, bad smells, and now I have to share my space with this animal." Mara, expecting that reaction, replied, "Joel, please, you haven't looked at me in years. I'm alone in this house. If you won't talk to me, if you won't be my partner, then I'll have someone else." The words came out harsher than she intended, but they were true. Joel's eyes widened, his face red with fury. "You're replacing me with a dog, is that it?" he yelled, pointing at Bro, who wagged his tail obliviously. "Maybe because, in these few minutes, he's looked me in the eye more than you have in months," she shot back, her voice quivering with emotion. The fight broke out right there. Mara didn't want to argue, but she was tired of being invisible. She scooped Bro into her arms and locked herself in the bedroom, while Joel pounded on the door. "Get that animal out of here now!" he shouted from the other side, his fists banging against the wood. But she didn't respond. She just hugged the puppy tighter, feeling hot tears stream down her face. In that moment, she decided Bro would be her companion, her refuge, since her husband seemed more distant by the day. The following days only got worse. Where they'd once avoided each other in silence, now they fought over anything. Joel grew to hate Bro, convinced the dog was the symbol of the growing rift between him and Mara. "This animal's pulling you away from me," he accused, his tone dripping with resentment. "No, Joel, you left first," she replied, her eyes cold, but brimming with a pain he refused to see. There were moments when they tried to reconcile. Tentative kisses, promises whispered in the dark. But the second Bro came near, it all fell apart again. "You care more about him than me," Joel would yell, kicking the air in frustration. Meanwhile, Mara grew closer to the dog. Bro grew fast, his black fur gleaming in the sun, his eyes always fixed on her. In her moments of loneliness, she started studying canine behavior, devouring books, videos, and articles on how to communicate with dogs. At first, it was just a distraction, teaching basic commands like sit or lie down. But over time, it became something bigger, almost an obsession. She watched Bro's expressions, the sounds he made, the meaning behind each bark, each howl. They built a bond so deep, it seemed to transcend the ordinary. One afternoon, while playing in the yard, something unexpected happened. Mara, lying on the grass, smiled at Bro and just for fun, let out a short howl. To her surprise, he replied with an identical howl, ears perked, eyes shining with curiosity. She frowned, intrigued, and howled again, louder this time. Bro mimicked her instantly, the sound echoing through the garden. Mara felt a shiver of excitement. This wasn't just play, it was a connection. From that day on, she began training Bro with canine sounds. A long howl to get his attention, a short bark to drop something. He obeyed with uncanny precision, as if they'd developed a secret language, a code only they understood. But not everyone saw it that way. One night, Joel came home from the gym, sweaty and exhausted, and stopped in the yard when he heard laughter. There was Mara lying on the grass, barking at Bro while the dog bounded around her, answering with excited barks and wagging his tail like a frantic metronome. Joel's jaw dropped, incredulous. "What the hell is going on here?" he asked, his voice thick with disdain. Mara, still laughing, looked at him lightly. "I'm teaching Bro some commands," she explained, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Joel crossed his arms, his face twisting into a grimace. "Since when do you have to bark to teach a dog something? You're losing it, Mara." She sighed, trying to stay calm. "It started as a game, but he responds to it. Watch." She pointed at Bro, who was chewing an old slipper. Mara barked once, short and sharp. The dog stopped immediately, dropped the slipper, and sat, looking at her attentively. "See? A howl for attention, a short bark to drop something. It's amazing," she said, her face lighting up with a genuine smile. But Joel didn't share her enthusiasm. His expression darkened, fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't normal, Mara. You're acting like a dog, for God's sake." The argument erupted again, but this time Mara didn't hold back. "You know who lost it, Joel? You. Years ago, when you decided to take that crap that ruined our dream of having a kid. And now you call me crazy." Her words flew like arrows, each one aimed at his weakest spot. Joel's face turned red, a mix of anger and shame. "You think I don't regret it? I didn't know it'd make me sterile. I'd never have taken it if I'd known," he shouted, his voice cracking at the end, eyes welling up. He took a deep breath, put his hands to his face and tried to stifle the frustration consuming him. "I know I screwed up, but you have no idea how guilty I feel every day," he admitted, his voice lower, almost a whisper. Then he turned and stormed into the house, leaving Mara alone in the yard, the silence heavy as lead. That night, Joel made a drastic decision. He packed his bags, tossing clothes into a backpack with rough movements, his face set like stone. He approached Mara, who was watching TV in the living room, and said, "That's it, Mara. I'm leaving." Her eyes widened, her heart tightening in her chest. "What? What do you mean you're leaving?" she asked, her voice shaking. "This isn't working anymore. We fight all the time. We don't get each other. It's over. We're better off going our separate ways," he replied, staring at the floor, avoiding her gaze. Mara felt her world collapse. She knew he was right. The marriage was in tatters, but memories of happier times flooded her mind. Their first kisses, nights of laughter, the plans they'd made together. She still loved him, despite all the pain. As Joel turned the doorknob to leave, she ran to him and hugged him from behind, holding him tight. "Please, Joel, let's try one more time," she pleaded, tears soaking his shirt. He hesitated, closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then he turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "Mara, I know everything's a mess, but I love you. Let's try just one more time." The bags hit the floor with a dull thud. They embraced, their bodies pressed together as if they could mend every crack with that touch. Kisses followed, urgent and hungry, and that night, they made love like in the old days, as if love could erase years of hurt. But the peace didn't last. The next morning, Joel was woken by Bro tugging at his sock with his teeth, tail wagging like it was a game. Furious, he jumped up and yelled, "Damn dog!" He shoved the animal away with his foot, the harsh movement echoing in the room. Mara rushed to the living room at the sound of shouting. "What happened?" she asked, eyes wide. "This dog woke me up!" "Are you messing with me?" Joel roared, his face red with rage. "Please, Joel, he just wanted to play," she said, trying to calm him, but he exploded. "Play? You know this animal's been driving me nuts since it got here. You care more about him than me." The fight started again, the same cycle of accusations and resentment. But this time, something different was coming. Weeks later, Mara started feeling strange. Frequent dizziness forced her to lean on walls. Nausea hit with the slightest strong smell, coffee, perfume, even dish soap. Joel, despite their emotional distance, noticed. "What's wrong with you, Mara? You spend all day rolling around with that dog." "Maybe it's a bacteria," he said, his tone more concerned than accusing. She rolled her eyes. "Of course, it's always Bro's fault," she retorted. But the symptoms persisted until, on a friend's advice, she decided to take a pregnancy test. Alone in the bathroom, Mara held the test with trembling hands. When she saw the result, positive, she nearly fell backward. Her eyes shone with shock. "No, this can't be," she whispered to herself, her heart racing. Joel was sterile. The doctors had confirmed it. How could this be happening? Still reeling, she decided to turn the news into a surprise. She wanted to believe it was a miracle, a divine gift to heal their marriage's wounds. That afternoon, the couple left the house together for the first time in months. They bought a pair of tiny white baby shoes at a small shop, and Mara came back full of plans. That night, she set the table carefully, lit candles, laid out a nice tablecloth, and placed the shoes on a covered tray in the center. She wanted the moment to be unforgettable. When Joel got home, tired from the gym, he frowned at the romantic setup. "What's going on here? What's this dinner about?" he asked suspiciously. Mara smiled, trying to hide her nerves. "It's a dinner to mark a new chapter in our marriage," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Joel tilted his head, confused. "New chapter? Okay, but why?" he pressed. "Lift the tray cover and you'll see," she replied, her eyes sparkling. Joel hesitated, but slowly lifted the lid. There were the shoes, delicate and small, right in the center of the tray. He froze, his eyes locked on them, speechless. Before he could say anything, Mara lifted her shirt, revealing her still subtle belly. With red lipstick, she'd written, "I'm pregnant." Joel went pale, his face draining of color. "What kind of joke is this, Mara?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She smiled, tears streaming down her face. "It's not a joke. I'm pregnant, Joel." He blinked repeatedly, shaking his head as if trying to wake from a dream. "This is impossible. We tried for years. The doctor said I'm sterile. All the tests." Mara grabbed his hand, lacing their fingers tightly. "Maybe it's a miracle. Maybe God gave us this gift to change our lives," she said, her voice brimming with hope. Joel stared at her for a long moment. He knew Mara like the back of his hand, her habits, her routine, her every move. He knew she'd never betray him. But how could this be? His eyes filled with tears, his body shaking with emotion. He dropped to his knees, hugged her belly, and kissed it tenderly. "My God, I never thought this could happen," he whispered, his voice choked. Bro, watching from a distance, entered the room then, his tail wagging slowly. He approached Joel, who for the first time didn't push him away. Instead, he reached out and petted the dog's head, a simple gesture carrying immense weight. In that moment, everything seemed perfect. A family rebuilding, a dream rising from the ashes. But peace, as always, wouldn't last long. The months passed, and Mara's pregnancy progressed. Bro grew even closer to her, a silent guardian who seemed to understand what was happening. Whenever Mara sat down, he'd rest his head on her belly, eyes fixed as if listening to the baby's heartbeats. Joel, though, began feeling a growing unease. When he got near, Bro would growl low, baring his teeth, his piercing eyes staring at him like a warning. "This dog's weird, Mara," he remarked one night, watching the animal lie beside his wife on the couch. She smiled, stroking Bro's fur. "He's just protecting us," she replied, her voice light. But Joel couldn't shake the discomfort. Mara's belly was growing at an alarming rate, far beyond what seemed normal. It was too big, disproportionate, almost impossible for a typical pregnancy. To make matters worse, Mara refused an ultrasound. "I want it to be a surprise," she'd say, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Joel, however, didn't see it as a surprise. He saw it as a mystery, an uncertainty gnawing at him. Every time he walked into the room and found Mara on the couch barking or howling at Bro, a chill ran down his spine. The dog responded instantly, licking her belly with an insistence that seemed to say something no one else could decipher. Paranoia began to fester in Joel like a poisonous weed. What if this child wasn't his? What if? He tried to push the absurd thoughts away, but they came back stronger each day. The more he tried to ignore them, the worse it got until, in the 9th month of pregnancy, he couldn't take it anymore. Mara was enormous, her belly so massive it seemed inhuman, almost impossible to carry. Consumed by doubt, Joel let slip the question he never should have asked. "Mara, is this baby mine?" Her eyes widened, shock etched across her face. "What do you mean by that, Joel?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. He took a deep breath, pressing his hands to his temples. "Look at you. Your belly's weird. Something's off, and you refuse an ultrasound. He faltered, his eyes falling on Bro resting beside her. Mara followed his gaze, and in that instant understood the implication. An icy shiver ran through her from head to toe. "Joel, you can't be thinking that," she said, her voice low, brimming with restrained anger. He covered his face with his hands, nerves taking over. "It's not normal, Mara. This dog never leaves your side. He growls at me. You bark at him. He licks your belly. I try not to think it, but this is all too strange." Rage erupted inside her like a volcano. "Don't you dare open your mouth to say something that insane," she screamed, struggling to her feet, her eyes blazing with fury. The argument escalated, harsh words flying like knives. "What are you accusing me of? You know I don't leave the house, that I'm faithful to you," she roared, tears streaming down her face. Blinded by emotion, Joel grabbed his things and shouted, "I'm going to the gym."
"I need time to cool off!"
He stormed out, slamming the door, the sound echoing through the house like thunder. Mara stood there alone, her heart constricted, a lump in her throat. She tried to stand, to go to the bathroom, but as she took her first step, she felt something warm run down her legs. She froze. Her water had broken. Panic seized her, her body trembling as she searched for her phone to call Joel. But she couldn't find it. Her breathing grew shallow, desperation mounting. Then she looked at Bro, who stared back with those bright eyes. "Bro, buddy, come here," she called, her voice weak. The dog barked once and ran to the shelf, grabbing the keychain with his mouth and bringing it to her. It was the car key. With difficulty, screaming in pain with every move, Mara opened the car door and dragged herself inside. Bro jumped into the passenger seat, and she drove to the hospital, her whole body shaking, her mind spinning between fear and hope. That's how they arrived at the start of this story. While Mara gave birth in the delivery room, something was happening outside. Bro, hearing his owner's final howl, bolted from the hospital like lightning. He raced through the neighborhood streets, dodging cars and pedestrians, his eyes locked on a single goal. Mara's howl carried a command he knew well: find Joel. The dog ran non-stop, paws pounding the asphalt, until he reached the gym where Joel was training. The place was packed, the sound of dropping weights and muffled chatter filling the air. Joel, sweaty and focused, was doing push-ups in a corner, trying to drown his emotions in each rep. Suddenly, he felt something tugging at his leg. Startled, he looked down and saw Bro, teeth clamped onto his pant leg, eyes gleaming with urgency. "Bro, what are you doing here?" Joel asked, frowning. The dog let go, sat and howled, a long deep sound that cut through the gym's noise. Joel felt an icy chill creep up his spine. Something was wrong. Bro barked again, pulling harder, insisting he follow. Joel's heart raced. Without hesitation, he stood and ran after the dog, panic overtaking his mind. What happened to Mara? He thought. hating himself for leaving her alone at that moment. Bro led him through the streets, paws swift and sure, back to the hospital. Inside the delivery room, the second baby was born. Kaya, holding the newborn with shaky hands, breathed a sigh of relief, seeing it was normal, big, healthy, its strong cry echoing through the room. Mara, exhausted on the stretcher, fainted from fatigue. Dr. Leandro, still shaken from his earlier collapse, got up from the floor, his eyes dazed as he tried to pull himself together. He approached Kaya, who was tending to the babies, and looked at the twins side by side. Then it all clicked. The first baby, the one that made him faint, had hair on its face and unusually long hair for a newborn, a shocking sight that caught him off guard. It was neonatal hypertrichosis, a rare condition. The second, though, was perfectly typical. At that moment, Joel burst into the room, panting, his chest heaving with heavy breaths. "My wife! Where's my wife?" he shouted, eyes wild with desperation. He saw Mara on the stretcher, pale and worn out, and rushed to her. Bro followed, stopping by the door. When Joel looked at the babies, he didn't feel the fear the doctor had. His eyes welled with tears, his heart overflowing with love. "They're perfect," he said, his voice breaking, kneeling beside Mara and kissing her hand tenderly. "We're parents now." Mara, waking slowly, saw her children and wept with emotion. Bro, from a distance, barked 3 times, as if celebrating with them. Dr. Leandro, still curious, turned to Joel. "You're the father?" he asked hesitantly. Joel nodded, eyes fixed on the babies. "Have you ever taken anything for hair growth?" the doctor asked, crossing his arms. Joel blinked, confused. "Yeah, minoxidil for a few months." "Why?" The doctor sighed, relieved. "That explains it. Your son has neonatal hypertrichosis. It's a rare side effect from excess hair growth hormones in the mother's body during pregnancy. In this case, it was the minoxidil, but he's healthy. The hair will fall out over time." Joel's eyes widened in pure horror, his mouth opening in a silent scream before the sound finally broke free. A yell of astonishment that echoed through the entire hospital. Without thinking, he handed the baby to Kaya and stumbled back, his body swaying until he collapsed unconscious on the floor. The sound of his fall was muffled by the echo of his own scream, a noise so loud that even the dog's howl outside seemed to falter for a moment. Kaya, now holding the baby in her arms, felt her heart pound like an out-of-control drum. She took a deep breath before daring to look at the infant's face. When she did, her entire body began to tremble, her legs buckling as she whispered, "No, this can't be." Her voice was barely audible, laden with a fear she couldn't name. Before she could process what she saw, Mara, still lying on the stretcher, started barking again, the sounds coming in loud, desperate bursts. Amid the barks, another cry signaled the arrival of the second baby. Kaya felt an icy chill run down her spine. "My God," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the newborn, trying to make sense of what was happening in that delivery room, to understand what was so terrifying about that baby. We need to go back in time exactly 2 years before that chaotic day at the hospital. Mara and Joel had been married for just over a decade. At first, their relationship was like a fairy tale, an intense love filled with affection, companionship, and promises whispered in each other's ears. They laughed together, dreamed together, and built plans for a life that seemed perfect. But as the years passed, reality crashed down on them like an unbearable weight. Daily life brought routine, awkward silences, and a distance that grew slowly, like a crack in glass that no one knew how to fix. The love was still there, buried somewhere, but it was no longer enough to fill the void settling between them. In a desperate bid to reignite the spark and strengthen what remained of their marriage, they decided it was time to start a family. Having a child became the shared dream they believed could save them. They spent nights imagining what it would be like, picking out names, planning the baby's room. But fate had other plans. Despite endless attempts, costly treatments, and visits to specialists, Mara couldn't get pregnant. Each negative test fueled their frustration, a tight knot that choked them both. Until, after a battery of tests, the news that would change everything arrived. Joel was sterile. His infertility wasn't a random twist of fate, but the result of years of reckless choices. Joel was a bodybuilder obsessed with achieving physical perfection. For a long time, he'd used anabolic steroids in excessive doses, ignoring warnings, risks, and consequences. The sculpted body he flaunted with pride had come at a steep cost, his chance at fatherhood. When the doctor delivered the diagnosis, Joel felt the ground give way beneath him. Mara, beside him, listened to the words in silence, her face impassive. But inside something shattered. She didn't say anything then, but she began to harbor a quiet resentment, a hurt that grew like weeds in the depths of her soul. Joel, meanwhile, sank into guilt. He looked in the mirror and saw not a strong man but a failure. He tried to reach out to Mara, but the words wouldn't come, and the silences between them turned into chasms. Some days they barely exchanged glances, sleeping in the same bed like strangers divided by an invisible wall. When arguments erupted, they were explosive, full of accusations and swallowed tears. The tension was so thick, it suffocated the air in the house. It was in that void that Mara made a decision that would alter the course of their story. As the night grew darker, the weight of the day's events seemed to hang in the air like a dense fog. Mara's hospital room, once filled with the frantic sounds of her labor and the chaotic energy of the staff, was now tranquil. The only noise that punctuated the stillness was the soft hum of the machines monitoring her vitals, the occasional beeping breaking through the quiet like distant thunder. But even in this peace, something still lingered, a tension, an unsolved mystery that neither Mara nor Joel could shake off. Joel sat by Mara's side, his hand clasped tightly around hers, his thoughts racing. He had seen his wife give birth to their children, watched them grow from two tiny forms inside her to two living, breathing beings, their cries now filling the room. It should have been a moment of joy, and yet all he could feel was unease. His mind was full of questions, doubts, and a gnawing feeling that something had gone horribly wrong, something that no one could explain. He glanced at Mara, her face pale, her eyes closed in a peaceful, exhausted sleep. Her chest rose and fell gently as she breathed, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips, though she seemed oblivious to the storm brewing in Joel's heart. Bro, the dog, had long since left the room, but the sound of his barking was still fresh in Joel's mind. He couldn't understand it. Why had the dog acted like that? Why had it responded to Mara's pain and her cries? Why had it seemingly protected her with such fierce determination? And the way it had looked at the newborn babies, as if it knew something that the doctors, nurses, and even Mara herself didn't. Joel shook his head, trying to banish the questions. He didn't want to think about the dog, about the strangeness of the night, about the bizarre, inexplicable events that had unfolded. All that mattered now were the babies, his children. His heart swelled with love for them, despite everything that had happened. They were his flesh and blood, born into a world full of uncertainty, but they were here now. They were real. The sound of soft footsteps broke through his thoughts, and he turned to see Dr. Leandro standing in the doorway, his face tight with concern. The doctor hesitated for a moment, looking at Joel and then at Mara. He was still visibly shaken by the events that had transpired. The memory of the first child's birth, the one with the unusual hair growth, was still fresh in his mind. He had never seen anything like it. The sight of the newborn's face, covered in thick, dark hair, a condition known as neonatal hypertrichosis, had nearly sent him into shock. He had been a doctor for over 15 years, but this was beyond anything he could have prepared for. "How is she?" Dr. Leandro asked, his voice low, careful. "She's okay. Exhausted." "They're both okay," Joel replied, his voice rough with emotion. "But doctor, I don't understand. What happened? Why did the first baby have that condition? And the dog? Why was it there protecting her?" Dr. Leandro stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him. His gaze lingered on the babies, who were both sound asleep in their bassinet, and then back at Joel. "I don't know," he said honestly. "We need to investigate. The first child, the hair, it's something we don't fully understand. And the dog, it's hard to explain. But I promise you, Joel, we'll figure this out. We can't jump to conclusions, not yet, but I have a feeling this is only the beginning of something bigger." Joel nodded, but his mind was still reeling. His gaze returned to the babies, his two perfect children, and a deep sense of fear gnawed at him. What if they weren't really his? What if everything that had happened in the past months, from Mara's pregnancy to the birth, was part of something far darker than he could imagine? He could feel his stomach tighten with dread. As if sensing his unease, Bro appeared at the door again, his black fur gleaming in the dim light. The dog's piercing gaze was fixed on Joel, its eyes bright with an almost unnatural intensity. Joel's heart skipped a beat. He felt as though the animal was judging him, sizing him up, as if it knew something he didn't. He shuddered involuntarily. I need to go out for a moment, Joel muttered, his voice low. I need some air. Before Dr. Leandro could respond, Joel stood up and quickly left the room, his legs carrying him down the hospital corridor with a sense of urgency. He needed space, time to think, to calm his mind, but the questions still burned in his chest. He had to understand what was going on. Outside the hospital, the night air was cool, the sound of crickets in the distance creating a peaceful atmosphere. But Joel couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gripped him. His breath came in shallow gasps as he paced in front of the hospital, trying to make sense of everything. The air felt thick, heavy with something unspoken. Then, out of nowhere, a howl pierced the stillness. The sound sent a chill through his spine, and he turned sharply toward the direction of the noise. It was Bro, standing at the edge of the parking lot, his head tilted back, howling into the night sky with a haunting, mournful cry. Joel froze. The sound was too familiar, too raw. It was the same howl that had echoed through the hospital earlier that night. The same one that had responded to Mara's screams. Bro's howl was followed by another, this time from further down the street. Joel's heart hammered in his chest. He didn't know what was happening, but the pieces were beginning to fall into place. He rushed back into the hospital, taking the stairs two at a time as he made his way back to Mara's room. When he entered, he found Dr. Leandro and Katia standing over the bassinet, their expressions unreadable. "What's going on?" Joel demanded, his voice rising with panic. Katia looked up at him, her face pale. "You need to see this," she said quietly. Joel approached the bassinet, his heart in his throat. The second baby, the one that had been born moments ago, was lying there peacefully, its tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. But as he looked closer, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The baby's eyes, still closed, began to flutter open, revealing bright, glowing pupils that shimmered with an unnatural light. Joel gasped, his breath caught in his throat. The baby's skin seemed to glisten faintly in the dim light, a strange, otherworldly glow emanating from its tiny form. It looked almost like something not entirely human. "What the hell is this?" Joel whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief. Dr. Leandro stepped back, his hands shaking as he adjusted his glasses. "I don't know," he muttered, "but this is not normal. I've never seen anything like it." The room fell silent as they all stood there, staring at the baby, trying to understand what was happening. And then, just as suddenly, the glow faded, and the baby's eyes closed once more, returning to a normal, peaceful state. Joel sank into the nearest chair, his head spinning. He had no answers, no explanations, only more questions. And above all, the certainty that whatever had happened in that delivery room wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. As Mara continued to recover, the weeks that followed became a blur of hospital visits, tests, and sleepless nights. The mystery surrounding the births deepened with every passing day, as Joel and Mara tried to make sense of what had happened. The babies, though unusual in some ways, seemed healthy and normal. But the strange events surrounding their birth, the dog, the glowing eyes, the connection with Bro, kept them awake at night, wondering if they were part of something far bigger than they could comprehend. It wasn't long before people started talking. The news of the bizarre birth spread through the hospital like wildfire, drawing the attention of doctors, journalists, and even researchers who wanted to study the twins. They were the subject of fascination, their births seemingly defying every known law of biology. No one had answers. No one knew what was happening. But the questions would not go away. Like, comment, and share this video with others if you want to be a part of this strange and mysterious journey. Who knows what comes next? What is the true connection between Mara, the twins, and Bro? And what secrets do these children hold?